Most runners don't know this, but your breathing could be the reason running feels so hard. Inefficient breathing can use up to 20% of your energy. So if running feels harder than it should, if you get out of breath when you run, or your legs are fine, but your breathing can't keep up, this might be why. Now here's the interesting part. Fixing it could make you run 7% faster without training more, without adding mileage, and without pushing harder. Most runners just train their legs and their heart, but almost no one trains their breathing. Why not? Dr. Andrew Sellars is a physiologist and endurance breathing expert who studies how breathing limits performance and how to fix it so athletes perform better by breathing better.
He really did change my life because he opened up my mind to new understandings of physiology. And when I went back to school after that summer, my shift at school's focus went to physiology, and I started studying physiology. I did a master's degree in coaching studies at University of Victoria, and then I was accepted to medical school and went on to medical school. And I kept the passion for physiology and an understanding of exercise and kept coaching swimming as I was through medical school. And everything that I learned in medical school reinforced some of the learnings that I had already been taught, but also made me question some of the wisdom of the long-standing understandings in medicine that have just been handed down but not really questioned over the years. And that involved understandings of breathing and understandings of lactate dynamics. And now, 12 years ago, we started a company called VO2 Master, which has developed the first ever portable wireless oxygen monitoring system for athletes. And that's been going very well. And then 4 years ago, I got involved with another colleague of mine, athlete friend, who wanted to start a company, and we started a company called Is CO₂ which is a respiratory training company and a device used to help athletes breathe better. So Is CO₂ really is a culmination of all of my passions of physiology, coaching, breathing, and medicine, all wrapped up into one little device in one small company. So that's how I split my time. I split my time between watching people breathe every day to helping people breathe better.
I definitely want to talk about Is CO₂ a bit later. But first, let's talk a bit about breathing as a performance limiter, because there's a lot of information out there about aerobic training, zones and all that, muscular training, but breath is often something that is not very much talked about. And I may be wrong, but I see running as two main aspects. You've got the skeletal muscular system, and then you have the cardiorespiratory system. And then, as the name suggests, under the cardiorespiratory system, you've got a cardiovascular side and you have the respiratory side. But somehow the respiratory side is always not talked about for some reason. And it's always the cardio side that's talked about, your aerobic training, your anaerobic, your zones, but respiratory is kind of left out. So that's what I really want to talk about today. So, a lot of people think, myself included, that our legs or our cardiovascular fitness are often the main limiting performance factors, especially as we age. But how much of that do you think is breathing that is contributing to that bottleneck?
It's a very good question. I'm gonna take you back one step further. The way you broke that down between musculoskeletal and cardiorespiratory is a brilliant way of thinking about, especially for runners. But I'm going to throw in a couple other systems that are intricately involved with the process of running, which is neurologic, so the coordination of the movement. So it's not only the movement themselves and how the muscles and bones stand up to the impacts of running, but it's how those muscles and bones are coordinated to develop stride length and foot speed and cadence. All those things are essential to running. Then you also have the metabolic system, so the actual development of energy through the use of fuel, so how you fuel that motion. And then there's also the psychologic. So all those systems, and this dates back to my mentorship from Jürg Feldman, is his theory and what he shared with me and what I adopted as a brilliant insight into all exercise, is that all of those systems, all 6 of those systems, impact the sport that you are trying to perform. And each one of them can be a limiter to performance. So it's not that the respiratory system is the only limiter or could be a limiter. It's that any system could be a limiter. If you've broken your leg, you're clearly not going to be able to run for 6 weeks. if you have a tendon injury, it doesn't matter how good your heart and your lungs are, you're not going to be able to run as efficiently if you have a sore Achilles or a tight Achilles and doesn't allow you the stride length that you need to be able to bound to the next step. So when I look at it, the respiratory system is, of course, one limitation, potentially one limitation for athletes. It turns out that there's really good evidence that in high-performing athletes, up to a third of them have a limitation to the respiratory system that limits their top-end performance. The studies haven't been done very well in aging populations, and they haven't been done to a broad enough extent over a wide age range. So most of the studies that are done, and this is historically what always happens, is you study university students first because they're easy to get a hold of, and that's where the funding is at universities. So they study university students, and then it trickles out to the general public, and then somebody finds the funding and finds the energy to actually start studying older people or younger people or a wider age range and men and women and start comparing the differences. But that research hasn't been done yet. And really it's partly because there's not a lot of money in it. So the studies are coming out. The most recent one was done out of UBC in Vancouver that showed that at VO2 max, so at the highest level of intensity that creates the greatest oxygen demand, 1/3 of athletes noticed a significant feeling of shortness of breath before their legs gave out or their cardiac system was maxed out. And so there's a follow-up study happening right now at looking at what happens if we train those people with specific respiratory training intervention to see if we can overcome that limitation to the point that some other system becomes a limitation. So now it might be that their legs aren't strong enough to turn the pedals at that high intensity, or their heart can't keep up with the demands of the legs and the respiratory system. So that really is the focus of the next wave of interventions and the next wave of studies, is to see, okay, we know we've identified over a number of studies that respiratory can be a limitation. Now can we actually fix it? And there's a number of studies that show that respiratory training improves performance for high-end athletes. We know it'll improve performance for middle-range athletes because the middle-range athletes are just as limited by their systems as the high-end athletes. It's just the high-end athletes are more studied because that's where the money is.
How does the breathing actually affect or limit the performance? Is it the inability to absorb the oxygen that we breathe in, or is it the respiratory muscles? Performance matters, but so does body composition. As masters athletes, losing excess fat can help us move more efficiently and stay competitive. The problem is, if you're relying on a scale, it only tells you your total weight, not whether that weight is coming from fat or muscle. What I like about a body pod is that it gives you a much clearer picture of what's actually changing. It measures body composition from home with a level of accuracy that's normally only available in clinics with expensive DEXA scanners. What stood out to me is that it doesn't just give you one number. It shows how your muscle mass and body fat are trending over time, broken down by region. It even separates subcutaneous fat from visceral fat, which matters more for long-term metabolic health. For me, that kind of data is useful because it removes the guesswork. If I'm trying to improve performance while keeping body composition in a healthy range, I want to see trends over time. If you want to try it, Hume has a deal for my audience. Use code ENDURANCELAB for 20% off. It also stacks with Hume's current sale, so savings can go up to 50% total. The code's only valid for 7 days, and if you're in the US, it's HSA and FSA eligible, so your insurance may even cover it. Thanks to Hume Health for sponsoring this episode. As I'm closing in on 50, long runs, race-based efforts, and harder sessions leave me with more muscle soreness and fatigue than my younger self. Well, that's part of being a midlife runner. And when recovery slows, performance progression slows with it. After learning more about the research behind red and near-infrared light therapy, I became increasingly interested in using it as part of my post-workout routine. And while no recovery protocol will ever outperform quality sleep, red light therapy has become a core part of my post-workout recovery strategy. However, the issue with red light panels is practicality. They're bulky, expensive, and require you to stand or sit still in front of them. That's not always realistic. That's why I like the Nova Labs Light Pad. I can strap it directly onto my leg and focus on the areas that need the most attention after hard sessions. It's lightweight, easy to travel with, and I can even plug it into a portable battery pack and move around while using it. That flexibility makes the Nova Light Pad easy to use consistently, and consistency is what really matters. For me, it's been a practical way to help manage post-workout soreness so I can be ready for the next hard session when the training plan calls for it. As a listener of the Endurance Lab podcast, you get an exclusive 15% discount on all Nova Lab products. Use the link below and the code ENDURANCELAB15 at checkout so you can recover better and train more consistently. How does the breathing actually affect or limit the performance? Is it the inability to absorb the oxygen that we breathe in, or is it the respiratory muscles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's the muscles. And I say that in most cases. So at very high intensity, there is so much blood being pumped through the lungs that there is the possibility that you don't actually get enough time with the oxygen-rich air that's being breathed in for the blood to actually absorb that oxygen. So there are individuals that have such huge cardiac outputs, that have such a good cardiac reserve, that they push blood so fast that they actually can't oxygenate at all. And in those people, it's actually an oxygen delivery problem. But they are limited people because they have a weak respiratory system and a very, very strong cardiac system. And that's unusual to have that much of a gap. But it has been seen. We have measured people who have low oxygen saturations at high intensity exercise because of that dysfunction. But for most people, it's a muscle problem. It's a respiratory muscle challenge. And the reason is because the muscles that are essential for adequate respiration are mainly is the diaphragm, which is a large dome-shaped muscle that crosses across the rib cage and pulls down and opens up that space. But you also need intercostal muscles, the external and internal intercostal muscles, the muscles between the ribs, to help with expansion and contraction. You need accessory muscles of the abdomen and when you're breathing very hard, muscles of the neck, the scalenes, and other muscles of the shoulders to support very fast, very deep breathing. And there are so many muscles involved in that drive that it uses up to 20% of your cardiac output. So the cardiac output is the amount of blood being pushed forward, it's the amount of energy that's going to get to your body, and 1/5 of it is being used just by the respiratory system.
Wow.
So now you can imagine if you are a runner and you're running at 100% of your ability, but 20% of your energy is going to breathe, and your breathing is inefficient or weak, it is going to take away from your ability to run faster or run further. So for most people, the respiratory limitation is a muscular limitation that affects the efficiency of the breathing mechanism, which trickles down to causing a reduced output into the sport that they're doing. For your listeners, mostly runners and cyclists, it would be a reduction in their speed of running or a reduction in their endurance of running and cycling.
Because it's the muscles, is it safe to assume that as we age, the breathing mechanics and the respiratory efficiency declines?
I'm hesitating to say yes. You're right. Probably because we see declines in performance for everybody. The reason I hesitate is because we haven't looked at it. We haven't looked at what happens when we take a 40-year-old runner and help them maintain the respiratory system in a healthy way. And so we don't know which contributes more to decline. Is it range of motion issues, so hips tighten up and we lose flexibility in our muscles of our legs so that our strides aren't as long? Is it we lose some of the neurologic firing and the efficiencies of the neurologic system so they can't move their feet as fast? So we know that sprinters max out their speed in their early 20s, and it's unlikely to see a world-class sprinter into their late 20s and early 30s. But their careers are shortened by their decline in speed, and that speed is so reliant on speed of muscle contraction and neurologic firing. Whereas our endurance athletes, our marathon runners, are still improving into their 30s, into their late 30s, and some of them now showing that with sustained performance can compete at the world level in their 40s. Well, so until we see how they decline, we actually don't know. And so some of the answer I say is, yes, you're probably right. There will be a decline over time. But what happens, and can we maintain breathing and breathing efficiency into the later years? And my suspicion is probably yes, because most people aren't breathing at their most efficient because they've never trained it. So if we take the average 40-year-old, we can actually improve their breathing mechanics. So they won't see a decline from 40 to 50. They'll see an improvement because we've actually improved how they breathe. Now, if they've already done respiratory training all the way through their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they may be as good as they can possibly be by the time they're 40, and they will see the average decline that other people would see. But for the most part, we can see improvements in performance or improvements in breathing performance in all people we start training because they've never trained it before. And as soon as you start training those things, it is much like going to the gym and lifting weights. If you've never lifted weights before, you will see an improvement in your weight lifting at any age. And we've shown that in even advanced elderly people in their 80s. And we can show improvements in muscle strength by just training them because they've never lifted weights before. So there's a benefit to starting no matter what age, no matter what age you start at, you will see an improvement in your performance. I say performance. If you're competitive, you'll see improvement in your competitive performance. If you're just trying to see improvements in your tolerance for living and your comfort in living, you will get better by just starting training.
So it's kind of like a low-hanging fruit for anyone to start. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's nobody that we have trained that hasn't seen an improvement in how they feel and how they breathe by starting breathing training.
Because no one does breath training. At least in the endurance sports world, right? Yeah. I mean, in yoga practice, yes, but not.
Yes.
In this.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. There's some really good research to show that some interventions help athletes. I used to be involved with triathlon for years. I raced Ironman for 10 years and coached a lot of endurance athletes. And some of them would benefit from going to yoga classes. They would improve their cycling. It would improve their running performance. Some of them came from a background in music, and so they were singers or they were jazz musicians, and they felt like they were better runners because they were musicians. And they said they thought in their mind it was because they had rhythm and understanding of motion and movement and fluidity. And when you think back to it, you think about the impact that those different interventions had on their breathing. So the control of breathing to sing, or the control of their diaphragm to play musical instruments, and the focus on breathing in yoga, and the cross activity of the respiratory system to their sports. So my belief is that yoga has a really good impact on aging athletes for two reasons. One, because of the flexibility and maintains mobility of the spine and the hips and the legs. But the second part is it spends a lot of time focusing on breathing, and it becomes an awareness of how your diaphragm moves and how your ribs move in conjunction to coordinate the patterns. And that will have a long-term benefit to the performance of the sport that they're interested in.
Could we talk a bit about CO2 tolerance? Or could you shed some light on what low CO2 tolerance is and how it shows up in runners or athletes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's CO2 tolerance has a complicated physiology. There's a fairly simple understanding. Is for most people's two parts to the simple understanding. The first one is understanding that carbon dioxide, CO2, is the main driver for respiration. So when you hold your breath, and if anybody holds their breath, if you start holding your breath right now, as I'm talking, you'll find that the initial 10 or 15 seconds is fairly easy, it's comfortable. But after a period of 20 or 30 seconds, you'll start feeling a drive to take a breath. And most people associate that with a drop in oxygen, they're becoming hypoxic, but that's not true. If you have a pulse oximeter on, your oxygenation will still read 98, 99%. But after 30 seconds, your carbon dioxide in your body starts to climb. And it causes a chemical reaction. You have chemoreceptors in your brain that tell you your CO2 levels are too high, and it makes you take that next breath. The reason that is because your body's the CO2 is tightly related to your acid-base balance in your body, which is very tightly regulated to keep the enzymatic processes of the body in a very tight range. So your body pH is held very tightly between 7.35 and 7.45 pH. To maintain that very tight regulation, the body needed a way to be able to regulate it if there's any disruption to that pH. And it uses the CO2 as the chemical that can change quickly and be adapted quickly by changing your depth of breathing and how fast you breathe to keep the pH normal. So much more, your body is much more sensitive to changes in carbon dioxide than it is to changes in oxygen. So it can tolerate oxygenation. You're typically oxygenate close to 100%, 98, 99, 100%. But your body can tolerate being much lower oxygenation. If you go to altitude and wear a pulse oximeter, I quite often at Himalayan base camp at the bottom of Mount Everest, there's good evidence of most people sitting in the low 80s and even high 70s. And they can tolerate that for days on end. It does not cause any damage at all. But if your carbon dioxide is more than 2 millimeters of mercury outside of its normal range, your body is extremely uncomfortable. So that's the first understanding of the simplicity of why CO2 is so important. The second part is that the CO2 itself in the body has a complex and dramatic effect on many other systems, including the heart, including the vascular system, including the oxygenation system, how the oxygen travels through the blood. And that complexity is less important for the understanding of tolerance. So I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole.
That's all right.
But bear with me.
Sure.
The understanding of CO2 is complex. The application of CO2 is important. So what you were asking about a CO2 tolerance. So for people who have never paid attention to how they breathe, quite often in today's world, people are over breathing. So they're pushing their normal CO2 levels to the low normal level. If you overbreathe to the point of what we call hyperventilating, breathing too much, you blow your CO2 below that level and you start having symptoms. You will vasoconstrict the blood vessels in your head. You'll get a bit of a blurry eyed, a blurry vision, and your head will feel tight. And it doesn't cause headaches, but it causes a dysfunction in the brain because of the changing intracranial pressure.
That sounds a bit like the Wim Hof. Is that the Wim Hof?
If you've ever done Wim Hof breathing, you'll have sensed that because that's Wim Hof is hyperventilating. So if you blow off your CO2, you'll get that feeling. And some people call it you can get a euphoric feeling, and it's a little bit of a stoned feeling. That's exactly the feeling. Wim Hof is hyperventilating.
Okay,
so
got it.
That's blowing CO2 off. The opposite of that is if you hold your breath and you allow that CO2 to climb and it climbs beyond level, it does the opposite. It vasodilates in your brain, causes headaches, can cause you to pass out. It also has some beneficial effects on the heart. It actually creates a stronger contraction of the heart and a faster beating of the heart. And it's doing that to try and speed up blood flow to get rid of the CO2 that you are holding by holding your breath. And it's doing all of those things to bring you back into a normal range. And the passing out is so that it kicks your system into just breathing normally again because it doesn't like you holding your breath. So those are the two extremes. When you say CO2 tolerance, we're talking about how high a CO2 can we tolerate and what's the benefit of that. The benefits are related to the impact of slightly high CO2 levels in the system. And that, like I said, was stronger contraction of the heart, opening up of blood vessels, vasodilation. And if you can tolerate that without getting the symptoms in your head, then you can actually have increased performance. So you can drive more oxygen to the muscles because you've opened up blood vessels and you're beating your heart stronger and beating your heart faster. So there are benefits to having higher levels of CO2 in your system when you're exercising. And we have seen that across a number of different sports in testing athletes, that some of the highest performing athletes also run or cycle with a higher level of CO2 in their system. And the question is, did they develop higher performance because they were able to do that, or which came first, the performance or the change in how they were breathing? Still not enough research to understand that fully, but we know there are benefits to performance with higher levels of CO2 tolerance. The other thing, of course, is it's the intensity of exercise that causes the rise in CO2 in the first place. So the faster you run, the more CO2 you're producing, the more you have to blow it off. That's why you breathe faster when you run. If you're at full rest, you only need to breathe 2, 3, 4 breaths a minute if you're nice and relaxed. But as you start walking, you need to start breathing faster, and that's because you're creating more CO2. As you start running, you need to breathe faster. As you start sprinting, even more. If you can tolerate higher levels of CO2, the theory is you could actually run faster because you can tolerate the higher levels of CO2 being produced. And that's one of the theories that we are working on with athletes to help them understand what happens when they have to push a little harder towards the end of a race, or they want to sprint at the end of the race, but they're being held back because it's so uncomfortable. Some of that discomfort is because of the high level of CO2 that's happening. So that's the work we're doing with high performance. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So I guess the natural next question is, how does someone improve their CO2 tolerance?
Yeah.
What can they do about it? Or is there a way to train it?
There are many ways to train CO2 tolerance, and there are lots of different methods. And Wim Hof is one of the ones who has played around with the ideas of CO2, like we talked about. He does hyperventilating and then long breath holds. And that is playing with CO2 at both ends. It's hyperventilating to blow off the CO2 to start at a very low level, and then holding the breath as the CO2 climbs and climbs and climbs through the normal range, and then continues on above to an uncomfortable range. And how long can you hold your breath? So, like Wim Hof, there are a number of other techniques that play around with breathing patterns to trick your body, or to teach those chemoreceptors to not fire and to not alert the brain to take extra breaths. The most dramatic example, of course, are our free divers, the ones that are doing deep sea diving without supplemental oxygen. And I just saw a report, which I haven't confirmed yet, but I've heard of a few people who have seen it. But there's a gentleman, and I want to say he's Finnish. He held his breath now for 29 minutes. Shattering the world record. It keeps getting the ability to breath hold keeps getting pushed by new understandings of how to change the body system. So, I mean, if it's actually true, if it's actually 29 minutes, it's absolutely astounding that he's able to do that without causing any damage. But regular freedivers are quite often 7, 8, 9 minutes of breath hold. So you imagine their CO2 tolerance, their tolerance to survive with very, very high levels of CO2 is astounding. So when you ask, is it trainable? It absolutely is. And the freedivers are the ones that are pushing that to the absolute limit. So we are incorporating some of the freediving understanding, the freediving training into some of our athletes' training to look at what happens to their performance on a bike if they can tolerate high CO2 resting. What can they do when they're actually on a bike at a high intensity, creating high levels of CO2? Can we keep the calmness down? Can we keep the panic breathing away and just settle into a rhythm, despite all the body's information telling them to breathe faster, breathe deeper, and to panic, and to eliminate that panic breathing and keep it calm and smooth? Can we improve their performance?
That's so interesting.
That's the question. Yeah. And it's a question that hasn't been answered in studies yet, that is being worked on at a number of different levels in high performance sport. And it's typical that we see advances in high performance sport before the science and the physiology understanding of why that happens comes back and is then actually studied. Why did that training program work? Why does Zone 2 training work? There's been generations of athletes that have used Zone 2 training to great success, and it's only now that we're actually, the physiology and the study of it has come to an understanding of why Zone 2 is so important for athletes. And that's because of the mitochondrial development and the concentration of blood vessels and the opening up of capillaries, all those things that are beneficial responses to zone 2 training. So we had the theory as to why it worked, but now we're only now just seeing the physiologic proof of why it's working. The same thing is happening with CO2. There's a theory of why it works. There's the practical application, which we know has helped free divers. Does it help high performance cyclists? But we'll wait a few years to see for the study to come up.
Okay. Let's pivot a bit from training CO2 tolerance to respiratory muscle training, a different kind of training. At a foundational level, what is respiratory muscle training, and why should runners care about it, or athletes, or any endurance athlete care about it?
So respiratory muscle training, just like using a treadmill to train your running or a barbell to train your the strength of your bicep, we can train the respiratory muscles if we recognize that they are the limiting factor to breathing. We can train them just like we do in the gym by repetitive motion. And so you are doing respiratory muscle training whether you know it or not every time you go for a run, or every time you push your system beyond a resting level, you're going to be using your respiratory muscles. What we talk about with respiratory muscle training is focused respiratory muscle training. So not doing any other exercise, but just focusing on the respiratory muscles. So our device, and there are a number of devices that are out there. There are some devices that are resistant devices. So they cause resistance to the breathing. So you're having to push against a resistance to build strength and power. Our device, which I'll show you just really quickly, is basically a very simple device. It's got an anesthetic bag, which just like I use it at the work that I do, and it's got a breathing aperture which you hold in your mouth, and it's got a small ventilating port to allow some rebreathing of fresh air, while the majority of the breath that you take comes in and out through the bag. And what that does, it's called isocapnic because it's maintaining stable levels of CO2. Capnia is CO2 in the body. So isocapnia is stable CO2. And what that allows us to do is to breathe as deep and fast as we want while maintaining stable levels of CO2. So without hyperventilating and blowing off CO2, and without holding on to too much CO2 and causing CO2 tolerance, it's just breathing in the normal level of CO2, but breathing as deep and fast as if we were running or as if we were cycling. So we can do focused respiratory muscle training without challenging our legs or without challenging the other muscles of our body, and we can focus on the technique of the breathing and the ability to sustain that breathing pattern for long periods of time, which if we did it while running, we would get tired from the running and eventually we'd have to stop because it's too hard and too far. Whereas we can keep going with the respiratory training. So we can incorporate respiratory muscle training into any training program, but the big benefit is to focus primarily just on the respiratory muscles, like we would if we were going to the gym. We were just going to work on the quadriceps. So we're just going to work on hamstrings as the weakness. We could go to the gym, just work on the hamstrings, and then we can go to the track and we can go for a run, which are going to use our hamstrings, but in a different way because we haven't actually strengthened. We can go to the gym and strengthen them with a focus. We do the same thing with respiratory muscles.
Over the last 6 weeks, I've been experimenting with the isocapnic BWB as part of my training. I've been using it in two main ways. First, I've been doing breathing sessions with the app while sitting relaxed. The research behind this device shows it helps you increase ventilation while keeping carbon dioxide stable. In simple terms, it trains your breathing system in a steady and safe way. The second way I've been using it is in between high intensity intervals. After a hard rep, I take 5 to 10 seconds to let my breathing settle before I use the bag during the recovery interval for 2 minutes at a steady rhythm before the next interval. The idea behind this is to train the breathing muscles and regain control faster between hard efforts. Research suggests that this type of breathing work can improve breathing efficiency and support endurance performance over time. This summer, I turned 48 and I'm targeting my first sub-3-hour marathon. That means I'm looking at every lever that can support performance and recovery without adding more training mileage or intensity. Now, here's what I noticed. At my goal marathon pace, which is just under 4 minutes 15 seconds per kilometer or 6 minutes 50 seconds per mile, my breathing feels more controlled. At that pace, I used to run in a 2-2 rhythm, 2 steps inhale and 2 steps exhale. Lately, I've naturally shifted into more of a 3-3 rhythm without forcing it. With my breathing rate being slower and steadier, it feels like I'm using slightly less effort to manage my breathing. It's still early, but I'm seeing small shifts, and in endurance training, small shifts can compound into big results. It's interesting how respiratory training can potentially move the needle without increasing total training load. Only time will tell if it helps me break 3 hours this summer, but for now, it's staying as part of my overall training approach. If you'd like to try the isocapnic BWB yourself, they set up a deal for my audience. Use code JUSTMANSO at checkout and you get 10% off. Click the link below and start training your breathing the same way you train your heart and your legs. We talked a bit earlier about it being a low-hanging fruit. What kind of improvements have you observed with the athletes that you work with respiratory training? You know, across different age groups, like how many percentage gains can someone observe, assuming that their training volume and intensity distribution is kind of adjusted to be equal?
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot, and the answer to that question is it depends on how long they do it for. So we see, again, back to my mentor Jörg, we look at training as two different fundamental focuses. One is functional change, and the other is structural change. So when I say structures, I'm saying what your body is as we do an assessment, what your body is right now, what it looks like, how big the muscles are, how long the muscles are, how tall you are, how the bones all fit together. Those are the structures. And we can't change the structures day to day, but we can change the structures month to month and year to year. So if you have a heart that has a 150 milliliter output, we can change the size of that heart over 6 months to a year and almost double the size of your heart. That's a structural change, but it takes months and years of focused training on cardiovascular system. And this is the benefits to runners is they get a bigger, stronger heart. But it takes years to develop a big, strong heart. You're not going to see a change to the structure of the heart in 6 weeks. But you will see it if you continue on that program for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And this is why marathon runners can keep getting better. If they start running in their 20s, they can keep getting better into their 40s and 50s because they're developing a better, stronger cardiovascular system. That's the biggest benefit of running, is really the benefit to the cardiovascular system. So those structures take years to happen. So when you say how much change can you make, you can make dramatic change. You can make 50% improvements in your cardiac output. You can make 50% improvements in your respiratory system if you're willing to take months to years to develop it. In the first 6 weeks, those are functional changes. That's taking the system that you have and making it work better. So it's like lifting a barbell with your bicep. Your bicep's not going to change how it looks in 6 weeks. It's not going to be much bigger. But it can be much stronger because of the neurologic patterns that affect it and how many motor units you can recruit at the same time. So you can lift much heavier weight in 6 weeks, even though you haven't changed your body at all. So those changes tend to happen in 5 to 10% increments. So you can make a 10% improvement in your breathing in 6 weeks just by learning to breathe better. So more efficient movement patterns of the ribs, more efficient contraction of the diaphragm. You can get a little bit more flattening of the diaphragm with each breath in. You can coordinate with the expansion of the ribs. And those are functional changes that we see in everybody who starts respiratory training. 5 to 10% improvement in whatever you're measuring, to either the top end, they can get a 5% improvement in their VO2 max. They can get a 5% improvement in their 10-kilometer run time. But those, again, are functional changes that when you stop doing the training, they'll go away quite quickly. The structural changes that if you actually focus on respiratory training for 2, 3, 5 years, you develop much larger lung capacities and much more efficient breathing patterns. And those changes, we don't have the data to know how much different they are because the only athletes we've done that with, we don't have a cohort of athletes that haven't done the training to compare them to. We just know that we've improved their breathing to the point that it's no longer a limitation to their performance. And their limitations are musculoskeletal or neurologic or cardiovascular. And we have to focus on those as the other training things once they become limitations.
So 5 to 10%, did you say in 6 weeks?
Yeah, in the average athlete, absolutely. There's there's a really good study by one of our coaching cycling colleagues in France, Cyril Ritchie, who just published a 1-year study of his top performing cyclists. So he has, I think there were 18 or 20 athletes in his study, all world-class cyclists. So they're all training and competing at the Tour de France. He showed a 7% improvement in performance, even at that highest level, over a 48. Yeah. Now he did it over a year, included our respiratory training as part of his thing, and then added some resistance training towards the end of it, and changed the pattern of what he was focusing on as he progressed through the year. So he has he did a very detailed report, and it's on our, we've posted a summary on our blogs on the isocapnic site. But a 7% improvement in that level of performance is astounding. And so he's extremely happy with the focus of respiratory training, and his training obviously included cycling training, and it was a holistic approach to training. It wasn't just respiratory training, but the respiratory training was the additional part that he added on top of their program, that he attributes the change to the implementation of the respiratory training on top of all the other things they'd already been doing to get to be world class in the first place. Wow. So my understanding is, if you can take a world class athlete and help them get 7%, then there's no reason that you can't take an average athlete and have at least or more of an improvement, because they're not starting with a world class system. Mm-hmm. They're starting with an average system that has room for improvement across many areas. And as you start training, all those areas are going to improve. So your limitations really, there's no limit to the limitations that you can identify and improve. It's the benefit of starting training or continuing training at our age, or my age. I'm 10 years older than you, so it's even harder for me. But there are so many areas that I can continue to improve at my age that I'm not a world-class athlete. So I have lots of room for improvement. So I can keep seeing improvement if I focus on all the different limitations that I have.
Yeah, those performance gains are way more than what any super shoe on the market can offer in 6 weeks, and it costs less. Wow, that's fascinating. You talk a bit about VO2 max just now, and you said that it can improve but does the respiratory muscle training itself influence our VO2 max?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, historically, you were totally right when your initial comment was that historically people have said there's a cardiovascular system and there's the musculoskeletal system, and one of those is limiting VO2 max. And there's been a big argument in the history that one group, Salter, and the group said it was cardiovascular, and the other group said it was his recruits and his PhD students all said it was musculoskeletal. And they said, well, doesn't it depend on the person? And either one of them can be. It'd be ridiculous to think that there's only one potential limitation, right? Somebody who's just had a heart attack clearly has a cardiac limitation, right? They haven't changed what their muscles can do, but they've changed what the output can be from the heart. Same reason, if someone has an injury to their knee, they clearly have a musculoskeletal limitation, even though their heart hasn't changed. Now, if you add in the understanding that all the systems contribute to the performance in the first place, then any one of those systems can be the limitation. So if your VO2 max is limited by your respiratory system, you will see a benefit to your VO2 max by just doing respiratory training, even if you don't change anything else. If your limitation is your heart, and again, you won't know this unless you've done a VO2 max test and had someone look at it with the lens of what is the actual limitation to VO2 max. And if they identify that you actually have a cardiac limitation, and I'll use an example. I was testing with a prototype device that we were developing at VO2 Master. And over the Christmas holidays, my daughter was home from university and she's interested in physiology. So we did some testing, and she's 19 years old, almost 20. She has a highly functioning heart that can beat very, very fast, but she's never done a lot of endurance sports. So she doesn't have a big heart. She has a small heart that can beat very quickly. So her max heart rate is 200 beats a minute. The problem is that she hits that max heart rate at a fairly low intensity. So you can see her VO2 the amount of oxygen she's using goes up and up and up until she hits this heart rate of 200. And then she has no room to go. Her heart can't go any faster. So guess what? Her legs can't work any harder. She feels fatigued and she is working at her maximum. She starts to overbreathe. She starts to breathe 50 breaths a minute, which she can't sustain. And then that's the end of the test. That's the VO2 max. But hers is clearly a cardiac limitation. Her heart rate can't beat any faster. It can't fill and contract. If it's beating 200 beats a minute, it's beating almost 3 times it's beating more than 3 times a second.
Yeah.
So she can't beat any faster. She can't create any more cardiac output. So until she develops a bigger heart, it doesn't matter how she breathes. It doesn't matter how strong her legs get. So she's clearly a cardiac limitation. I can give her respiratory training, but that's not her limitation. There may be some evidence that if I help her with her breathing, it might help slow her heart down. And that might be the benefit to the cardiovascular system for her by doing respiratory training. But she actually already breathes fairly well. She actually has a pretty good lung volume for her short stature. She breathes 2.5 liters per breath and she can maintain that. And so her breathing isn't her limiter. I hesitate saying that everybody will see a benefit by doing breathing training because for some of the young athletes, my argument for training young athletes is if we help them learn to breathe now as a young athlete, they will use that pattern as their cardiovascular system develops and as their musculoskeletal system develops so that the respiratory system never becomes a limitation. And we have seen that in some of the endurance athletes that we've coached since they were young ages. They now have massive lung volumes. They have 7, 8, and even 9 liter lung volumes, where the average person is 4 to 5. So
Wow.
double the lung volumes. And they breathe at very slow rates, even at quite high intensity exercise. So they are not using much energy to move the amount of air that's needed to support their exercise tolerance. So they can focus their energy away from breathing and focus it on moving their feet faster or developing longer stride length. So they have all the bandwidth in their respiratory system to be able to develop better other systems. And that would be my argument for training someone, even if they don't have a respiratory limitation yet, is the idea is you're going to eliminate their other limitations. So my daughter's goal over the next semester is to develop a bigger heart. So she's going to do some lower intensity training to allow her heart to stretch with bigger blood supply. So she's going to do more hiking and less running. She's going to do more low intensity cycling instead of sprinting. And she's going to develop a bigger heart. That's our theory. And when she comes back, she's going to be able to perform the same intensity with a lower heart rate and an easier feeling. And she can then use that 200 beats per minute that she has, which is an incredible ability, at a higher intensity. And it's going to delay the onset of fatigue until she gets to a higher intensity. That's the goal.
Respiratory training. How would that fit into a midlife athlete's training regime, right? Between aerobic training, strength training, recovery, where does that fit in? Or how would someone fit that in?
The simple ways is to include it into the training that you're already doing, like you say, and not trying to add another layer. Or the benefit of it's such as our training tool is so small and simple and easy to carry around that we use it in 3 different ways. We use it as a warm-up tool. So to engage the respiratory system, to open up the lungs, to open up the rib cage, to engage the muscles of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. And there are some benefits to the rebreathing of the warm air, and the slightly elevated CO2 levels that happen at the lung level actually bronchodilates. It opens up the airways themselves and prepares the body for the exercise that's coming. So in our athletes who are just starting, we use it as part of their warm-up. So it doesn't add any more time to what they normally do, but instead of going jogging around the track slowly or walking before they run, they just breathe on the couch before they go out for their run, just for a few minutes to open things up. That's one way, simple way to do it. You can also use it as a cool down, at the end of the run, to slow the breathing back down again and bring the body back into a lower level of awareness and a low level of intensity. So by engaging the diaphragm, we're actually stimulating the vagus nerve, which drops the heart rate down and slows everything back down. So warm up and cool down is how we introduce it, understanding how the breath work works, and then finding a way to incorporate it into the training they're already doing. So if they're serious runners and doing interval training, we can actually incorporate the equipment, the Breatheway better, is we incorporate the Breatheway into their intervals, their rest intervals. So if they're running a track and they're running 400s and they're running a minute and a half to 2 minutes around the track, and then they're going to take a 1.5 to 2 minute break, we incorporate the Breatheway into their rest, into their break. And
So
there's a number of different, yeah, go ahead.
do they, the moment they stop, or the moment the athlete stops, do you use it immediately, or do you let the heart rate come down a little bit?
Two ways of doing it. Again, these are techniques of incorporating it. You can either rest for 10 seconds and then start breathing. If you breathe it immediately, what you're taking with you is the higher level of CO2 you had from the run is going to get breathed into the bag, and you're going to breathing a higher level of CO2, and it will actually no longer at that point become isocapnic. You'll actually be hypercapnic. You'll have high levels of CO2, and it feels very uncomfortable. Now, you talked back about the CO2 tolerance and the benefits of CO2 tolerance, and this is one of the techniques we use is run the track for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, however long it takes you to get around, start breathing, your CO2 will spike, and some people can't tolerate that. And so they'll take, all you have to do is take it out of your mouth and breathe a couple regular fresh air breaths, and it'll settle back down again. But what's fascinating is the body tolerates it, learns to tolerate it very quickly. And even after 2 or 3 sessions on the track, we have athletes that can run race pace around a 400 or an 800 and can breathe on the bag right away without having to remove it. They can tolerate the high level of CO2. And you actually can, if you're using a pulse oximeter, and you should use a pulse oximeter for these exercises, you actually see a drop in oxygenation. And that's, again, another feeling that is very uncomfortable. You become hypoxic, you become short of breath. But if you keep breathing, it comes back after about 30 seconds, it rises back up again and stabilizes. And when it stabilizes, you can do your next interval. And so it's a training technique. It's an advanced training technique that we use as athletes develop to be able to tolerate low oxygen, which has some also benefits by stimulating erythropoietin. So natural EPO, the drug that people cheat with, you can actually stimulate your own EPO to be released by creating hypoxic environments. And that is one of the ways of using the bag to have a performance benefit is we have used it to show higher levels of hematocrit, so higher levels of hemoglobin in the body by stimulating EPO release by doing hypoxic work.
Interesting.
So another advanced technique, but something that you can use isocapnic for.
Have you combined it with heat training? Because I understand that heat training also stimulates natural EPO.
Yeah, exactly. For the same reason, when you put the body under the right amount of stress, the body responds by understanding, if you're going to keep doing this to me, I need to have a response to that is going to protect me in the future. So heat training does exactly the same thing. It reduces your plasma concentrations. Your body says, well, I need to create higher levels of plasma. So if he keeps doing this, if he does this to me tomorrow, I need to be better prepared tomorrow than I was today. And it increases your plasma concentrations, increases your hemoglobin, because I'm not exactly sure why the heat training increases EPO, but the understanding would be where your body is trying to increase the amount of oxygen delivery to the muscles. And so there are benefits to it's partly to do with the plasma concentrations and the pressure across the kidneys and through the adrenal glands that has this reduce the production of EPO. But those are all the reasons that those natural stimulants to performance enhancing drugs that are coming internally from the body, and you don't need to reach outside the body to have EPO. You have it in your body, you just need it to be released.
Wow,
and
that's so interesting.
Hypoxic and heat training. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, in the lead up to my next marathon, I'm going to be overdressed on my treadmill with the bag blowing into it.
Perfect. Good. Well, we'll look forward to helping you with that. Yeah,
I need all the help I can get. We'll have to stay in touch. Yeah.
Absolutely. When's your next marathon?
In May, in middle of May. Yeah, I'm hoping to go under 3 hours. I'm just a bit over.
Yeah, we'd love to help you with that. We'll have to stay in touch as you progress through that training, and we'll do a follow up to see how you've actually used it in your training to help you get there. So one of the things that I would say is and this is for anybody who's starting to do respiratory training, is understand how they're breathing right now when they're running. so that they have a better understanding of how many breaths they take per minute. It's very simple. You just count. How are you just become aware of how you're breathing at your race pace. So at your 3-hour marathon pace, if you've been running like that for 5 or 10 minutes, then think, am I breathing 30 breaths a minute? Am I breathing 40 breaths a minute? And if you're breathing 40 or 45 breaths a minute, there is clearly a benefit to bringing it down into a more sustainable range, but that will mean taking deeper breaths. So if right now, if we put you on if we used VO2 Master and actually watched how you were breathing, if you're breathing 45 breaths a minute, you're probably going to be breathing somewhere around 2 liters per breath. And so 45 times 2 is 90 liters per minute. And that's typical of people that are running at a threshold or at a sustained running pace that's quite hard, which is going to be your race pace. The same amount of air can be moved breathing 3 liters 30 times a minute. So you're reducing the number of contractions from 45 to 30, increasing the volume from 2 to 3, which takes coordination of the diaphragm. So bigger contraction of the diaphragm, which is a really efficient muscle. You use it at least 10 times a minute every moment of your life. Every minute of your life, you're breathing somewhere between 6 and 50 breaths a minute. So your diaphragm is very, very good at contracting. And what we're going to teach it to do is, instead of breathing 45 breaths a minute, we're going to teach it to breathe 30 breaths a minute more efficiently. And that alone is going to save you 4 or 5% of your energy output.
Okay.
So that's 4 or 5% of energy that can then be used for other things, like a little bit longer stride length or a little bit faster feet. And that will allow your performance to improve once you can hold that breathing pattern for 3 hours.
So lower breath rate at a high intensity, essentially, is what we're talking.
Higher volume. It shouldn't be. Yes, the goal is lower respiration rate at higher running intensity. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of throws out what Jack Daniels talked about 2 decades ago. The coach Jack Daniels, not the whiskey.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he, in his book, he talked about a 2-2 rhythm for moderate intensity and going up to a 2-1 or even a 1-1 at high intensities.
Yes.
But what you're saying now, through your lens, is we will want to reduce the respiration rate, which means more strides per breath, per inhale.
Yes.
So that we are reducing the taxation on the respiratory muscles and use that efficiency saved towards some other muscular contractions at that kind of intensity.
So,
am I saying it right?
So Jack based, it's very good. So what Jack did was based his observation. So he observed, and he gets all the credit for being the first person to publish an understanding that people breathe in certain ways when they run. And this is a natural phenomenon. And this is what goes back to what I said before. The faster you run, the more you have to breathe. And Jack Daniels put that into really good, simple understanding. And we still use this today. So again, when he's talking about 2 and 2 breathing, he's talking about cadence looking at just one leg. So it's 4 steps. It's 2 rotations of the right leg.
Okay.
And when they start running faster, they go 1 and 1, which means that every time the right foot steps down, they take a breath in. Every time the right foot steps down, they take a breath out. So if you talk about Jack Daniels' way of cadence, it's using one leg. If you're looking at steps, it's double that. So he's saying at moderate intensity, they're taking 4 steps at a time. 2 and 2 is 4 steps at a time in, 4 steps at a time out. And everybody, if you push them beyond a comfortable pace to a fast pace, they'll drop to 2 and 2. Okay. Which is right foot, or step. So step in, step out. And what I'm saying is that if you can learn to control your carbon dioxide levels by more efficient breathing patterns, you can hold that 4 and 4 breathing pattern to faster and faster intensities before your body switches over to the unsustainable 2 and 2 breathing pattern.
Okay,
And if you can learn to switch, so that's what I was saying. Why I said you're at your race pace, most people will breathe 40 to 45 breaths a minute because they're running somewhere between 80 and 90 RPM. So they're running 80 or 90 steps with their right foot every minute. And if they're breathing 2 and 2, they're breathing half of that is 45 breaths a minute.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
So that's where that 45 goes. Yes. And if you go to 3 and 3, which is a little bit unusual, but it's 3 steps at a time, which is Jack Daniel's 2 and 1.
Yeah.
Right? Is 3 and 3. Okay?
Correct.
And he does a little bit longer inhalation than exhalation, so it's 2 steps in, 1 step out with the 1 foot. It comes out to the same pattern as if you did 3 and 3. Then at 90 RPM, at 90 steps per minute with the right foot, 3 and 3 pattern comes to 30 breaths a minute.
Okay, yeah.
And if you slow it down a little bit more and go to 4 and 4, it becomes 22 and a half breaths a minute. And if you slow it down even more, it comes to 15 breaths a minute. And these are typical patterns that all runners go through that will start with slow breathing. They will slowly increase their intensity, and they increase it almost everybody goes from 20 to 22, they skip through 30, and they go to 40, 45. And then after that, they lose control of their breathing and they're at their VO2 max and they can't sustain it for more than 10 or 20 seconds. And everybody goes through that pattern. If you start them at a slow jog and move them through a little bit faster to a race pace, to an all out, they will all go through that same respiratory pattern. Okay. And what we're going to do with your training is manipulate the pattern to see how long you can sustain that race pace with a slower breathing pattern so that it doesn't become the limitation. And then we train the respiratory system so it never becomes the limitation to your performance at that race intensity.
Between nasal breathing and mouth breathing, when should one think about switching over? Or is that something that we want to train with respiratory breath training?
Absolutely. So absolutely trainable, and recognizing that the nose does have some inherent limitations to how much air it can move in and out. So again, everybody will get to an intensity that they can no longer move enough air through their nose alone. So they're going to have to incorporate mouth breathing into the intensity when they get above a certain level. And again, there are some benefits to using nasal breathing. There's the main benefits to nasal breathing is it creates smooth, by breathing through the complex anatomy of the nose, it smooths out the airflow before it hits the trachea and makes it for more laminar flow, a smooth air into the lungs. The less turbulent that air is, the smoother and easier it is for the lungs to accept that air. It opens the lungs slower and creates a more fluid dynamic of air flowing in and out. So the turbulence causes irritation and inflammation in the lungs. So many people who are diagnosed with exercise-induced asthma, it's not asthma. It's irritation from turbulent airflow. And if you're from Finland, then you know what it's like to run in the cold.
Yeah.
and the cold air creates that irritation in the lungs.
Yeah.
And makes you feel like you have asthma. And that is a demonstration of what doctors call exercise-induced asthma, which is not exercise-induced asthma. It's exercise-induced cold air breathing with turbulent air. And if you breathe through an open mouth, you will pull cold, turbulent air into lungs and cause that feeling of ground glass and the irritation in the lungs, and makes you cough and makes you feel awful. That's what people with exercise-induced asthma feel. And they can eliminate that by slower breathing and breathing through the nose. They will push those limits to where they hit that turbulent airflow further if they're able to breathe through the nose longer. So absolutely beneficial to breathe through your nose. Everybody will hit a limit at how high an intensity they can run before they switch to mouth breathing. And the closer we can get to your marathon race pace, and some people are able to run their marathon pace with nasal breathing alone. And that is just through training and repetition and practice to tolerate that slower breathing pattern, because you have to breathe slower, because you can't breathe as fast through your nose as you do through your mouth. So you have to breathe slower with less airflow. So you have to tolerate slightly higher levels of CO2. And these are all the benefits that can happen if you can train. So the higher intensity you can train with nasal breathing, the better. There are lots of benefits to that.
So does the BWB help with training someone to breathe better nasally? Does it play? Okay.
Yeah. One of the benefits of training, focusing on just respiratory training, is you can focus on different breathing patterns.
Okay.
So you can focus on long, slow breathing patterns. We have a mask. So this is a mouth breathing one only, but we have a mask adjustment that you can actually practice nasal breathing.
Okay.
And you can practice different patterns. So you can practice your 22 breathing pattern, which is your slow jogging breathing pattern, but you can also practice your 30 breathing pattern. And you can practice your 50 breaths a minute breathing pattern for when you need it, if you're in a sprint at the end of a race, or if you're doing a 400 or 800 meter track session, you might have to breathe very fast. You can practice that breathing pattern as well. So you can practice all of the different breathing patterns and have an awareness of what your limitation for how long you can hold that pattern is.
But we don't do it when we're running, that's for sure, right? We do it when we're not.
No, you can't use the bag when you're running. There are some, again, very advanced things. You can do it on a treadmill with walking slowly, and you can actually create significant hypoxic stimulus. We do that under very controlled circumstances with a pulse oximeter, with supervision to create, again, the EPO release. And we don't do those for more than 5 minutes at a time.
Okay. I'm definitely going to link ISOCAPNIC in the show notes so people can check it out. I know we've gone over time, and I want to respect your time. If we can just, I didn't get through a lot of questions, but I guess we have to do that. Leave that for a next episode.
I tend to go down into rabbit holes. So
I love the rabbit hole. I love the rabbit hole. I love all the nuances and all. Okay, I'm just going to ask you very quickly, in relation to our conversation, is there something that we didn't touch on, or a question that I didn't ask that you think would be important for the audience to hear?
We started to talk about ways of incorporating it into specific training, and I'd love to talk to you more about that, and I'll look forward to follow up with you specifically about your training for marathon, and maybe we can turn that into an opportunity to talk about different ways of incorporating and what's been successful for you and what works for some people that might. Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to talk more about that in the future, and we can make some time to do that again another time.
I love that. And final question, what does endurance mean to you?
I tried to think of a good answer to this question, and I'm going to say endurance to me means the ability to sustain the challenges of life.
Profound answer. Dr. Andrew Sellars.
I wish for you great endurance in 2026 as you train for your marathon.
Thank you. Dr. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the conversation. You blew my mind. You just put so many more questions into my mind that we have to save for a round two.
I'm really glad. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. It was a lot of fun.
If there were topics in this conversation that you'd like me to go deeper into with this guest, leave them in the comments. If there's enough interest, I'll invite the guest back onto the show and dedicate an episode to a deeper follow-up conversation. Thanks for watching all the way through, and I'll see you in the next episode.